I want to name this morning that as Unitarian Universalists, we draw on many sources, and one of the sources we are called to draw upon, we are encouraged to draw upon, is the words and the deeds of prophetic people who challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, with compassion, and with the transforming power of love. And this week, this week of our national election, I can think of no better person, no better prophetic person upon whom to call for wisdom than John Lewis. John Lewis, who we named last week in our service of remembrance. We named those who we mourn who have died. John Lewis, who just died in July of this month. And if you don't know a lot about John Lewis and you don't, feel like reading his autobiography, which is pretty large, but wonderful, I want to encourage you. You might want to pick up, there's a series of 3 graphic books that are wonderful for all ages about his life. And just this summer, there was a documentary put out called John Lewis, Good Trouble. All good ways this week to continue to ground yourself in the wisdom that he brought to this world. So here's what I want to focus on for just a few minutes with you all this morning. John Lewis was a person who was awake to possibility. He was awake to possibility. When he was a kid, he preached to the chickens on his family farm in Alabama. He was awake to the possibility that he might do and be something more than a sharecropper on a cotton farm like his parents had been. As he grew older, he would wear a tie to school and he would carry a Bible around. He was so determined to go to college that when he was denied entrance, as he expected, to the state school nearby because of his race, he just wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He had no relationship with Dr. King, but he wrote him a letter, and Dr. King invited him to come meet with him. For a while, they even explored the possibility of pursuing a legal action against the school that had denied him entrance. That didn't happen, but John Lewis was from then on connected deeply to the civil rights movement and to many other movements in this country. Pursuing the possibility of true human equality expressed in socially just structures. He pursued that possibility his whole life. In Nashville, where he did go to college, he was awake to the possibility that the world could be different. The world could be different than how it was, that Black and white people could sit in a restaurant together and have lunch together. And it was in Nashville where he awakened to the possibility that significant social change can happen when people link their lives together and put them on the line, risk themselves, non-violently disobeying the law very often, being led by a higher purpose, that a different world is possible. That story we heard earlier in the service from my colleague, Reverend Karen Johnston, who serves a congregation up in New Jersey, by the way. That story we heard earlier in the service from Lewis's childhood, it moves me every time I hear it or read it. There they were, this whole bunch of children with one adult, in a very huge and dangerous storm came upon them. And their house was so small. So small. Who could think that they would survive when the wind seemed to be lifting the house up off of its very foundation? But did they lay down and give up? Did they run away and hide? Did they say, well, it must be God's will? No, they did none of that. In a moment when it seemed like there was no way forward, no possibility to survive, they made a way. They made a way. They clasped hands and they kept moving. They moved from one corner to another, always moving towards the part of the house that was compromised, the weakest part of the house, the part of the house that was in trouble. And that is how they survived that storm. You know, John Lewis's perspective comes not just from his own life, his long view also comes from his family history. One thing I learned recently is that Henry Louis Gates Jr., the scholar, you might know him, he hosts the show Finding Your Roots on PBS, where he helps people do genealogical research. He did some searching about John Lewis's family, and he found the voter registration record for John Lewis's great great grandfather from 1867. 1867, 2 years after the end of the Civil War. John Lewis's great great grandfather registered to vote. But you know what else Gates found or didn't find? He found no record that anybody in John Lewis's family between that great great grandfather and John Lewis himself had actually voted, had actually been able to vote. Think about that. Almost 100 years between 1867, when a freed slave registers to vote, and 1965, when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Voting Rights Act, spurred in part by the incredible sacrifices of John Lewis and many others, particularly in Selma, Alabama. We remember those people who died in and around Selma during that voting rights campaign. We remember Jimmy Lee Jackson, and we remember two Unitarian Universalists, Reverend James Reeb and Viola Liuso, who died working for the rights of all people to vote. So I don't know about you, but that 100 years can either depress us or it can give us hope, actually. Can give us hope. Because then it was just 20 years after the Voting Rights Act, 21, 1986, John Lewis was elected to the House of Representatives, where he served until he died this year at the age of 80. Throughout his life, as we have heard, John Lewis's example and invitation, and sometimes downright plea, was for people to get into what he called good trouble. You know, when he first got arrested, and he was arrested, there was a period of 6 years in the 1960s where he was arrested 40 times. He was arrested a lot. He's been arrested 5 times while he was a US congressman. But when he first got arrested, his parents were not too happy. His parents were not happy. They did not want him causing trouble. They did not want him in trouble, but he did it anyway. Somehow he knew in his body that there was another way, there was another possibility that we could reach, and that the only way to get through the storms in this country and to reach another possibility is to clasp hands together and keep moving together to make a way when it seems like there is no way. You know, it was just a few years ago that John Lewis led a sit-in at the House of Representatives calling for action on gun control after the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando that killed so many lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender siblings. Here he was, a person who was not just fighting for one part of our society. Here he was, a person who could be inside the power establishment of Washington, D.C., having served in Congress for many years, and at the same time still not be afraid to get into trouble, to stay awake to possibilities for a new way, for a better way. So this week, friends, having shared just these little bits of John Lewis's life, I want to keep his memory really close this week. If at times I feel like the house of our democracy is about to spin off its foundations because of our political storms, I want to remember to stop and ask, who can I clasp hands with? Where am I needed most? How can I hold myself to this ground, and bring who I am and what I have to this moment? Let's ask those questions together this week, friends. And if at times I wake up wondering what world I'm going to be raising my children in tomorrow, or what world the young adults we know and love are trying to make a way in, think about Olivia, think about Jacob, I think about Hannah and Henry and so many others in this congregation. I wake up wondering about what the world is going to be for them and for my own kids and for your kids and grandkids. I will choose to envision the world I want for them and let myself be awakened by those possibilities. And if at times I feel as if there is no way forward, I will think about John Lewis's great-great-grandfather and about the 100 years between that joyous day when he registered to vote and the day that John Lewis moved forward on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, facing the wrath of the Alabama State Police so that he and future generations of Americans could actually vote. I will remember that we are the ones who make our ancestors' dreams come true. And if perhaps this election week I have occasion to feel joyful and elated, first, I'm going to stop and really feel that. Let's do that, okay? Really feel it. Let it fill us up, because we need to feel some joy. And then I will remember all the people who brought us to that place of joy and give thanks for them. And then I will also remember that the work of love is never done. As John Lewis said, democracy is an action. It is never a finished product. We keep moving forward. And if I have moments of feeling down and despairing, I will also remember this week that John Lewis loved to dance. He loved to dance. John Lewis loved to dance. From a young age, he was very serious, but even he, in the midst of great struggle I can only barely imagine, he knew that we've got to dance a little to keep our energy and our spirits going. We've got to find our joy where we are able to. So maybe you'll dance a little this week. John Lewis said this. I leave us with his words. As long as I have breath in my body, I will do what I can do. You come to that point, this feeling that if you don't do it, if you don't do everything you can to change things, they will remain the same. And you only pass this way once. You have to give it all you have. Give thanks for the life of John Lewis, for receiving what he had to give in this world. May we be so awake to the possibilities for our own lives, the possibilities for this world. May we be so courageous. May it be so. Amen.